Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to part 3 of the video. If you haven't watched part 1 or part 2, the links are in the description. I recommend you doing those ones first so you can just follow along afterwards. Alright, so part 3, we're going to write a class, which I'm going to call it listing, which is going to technically take care of all our methods and functions for the last 3 format. So it's not going to write the command yet for the last 3, but it's going to do all the work in the background, and it's going to do it more smoothly than if you do a big file that just has everything involved. Alright, to get started, we're going to first create a new folder. And a new folder, I'm just going to call it module. And whenever I'm write classes, I'm just going to put in this folder. And module, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it listing.js. Alright, so now I got this empty file here. This is where I'm going to write the function, the class, I mean. So you just write class listing. Everything's going to go inside of these curly brackets. I'm just going to export it right now so I don't forget. So it's module.exports, and then it equals to listing. Alright, perfect. Alright, so when you write objects, you need to write a constructor and then you write methods for it. So for this listing object, the constructor is going to be empty. So it has no parameters, but it automatically will create 2 arrays, and 2 empty arrays for that matter. So one's going to be the data, so this dot data equals array. Alright, so this dot data is going to be an array of objects. That's going to be another object that we're going to create after this. It's going to be all of our entries. So whenever someone writes a code, the code that he's going to write is part of the entry. And actually, I'm just going to write it right now so it makes it simpler. So you can leave this file as is, and then just go to the module, create a new file. I'm going to call it entry.js. And this is going to be a class. And this class, we're going to have a constructor, which is going to take an ID, which is the server ID, and a username. The username is the username of the player. And then, so this dot ID is going to equal ID. And then this dot users is going to equal an empty array. And then this dot users is going to push the username inside the array. So when we create a new when we create a new entry object, it's going to take in a username, an ID, and a username. The ID gets saved as this object's ID, and then we create an empty array, and then we push the username in it. If we have multiple users that write the same ID, we're just going to push their username, and so it'll have one server ID and then a bunch of usernames in this array. Alright, so this is done. This is all you need for this class. Now we're going to reopen our listing, and we're just going to import that. So we're going to require the entry. So now whenever I write like a new entry, I have access to it. So this is going to be an array of entries, and then we're going to create another empty array, which we'll call this dot users, which will be equal to an empty array as well. So this is just going to save all the users. It's just a simpler way to be able to check if someone already wrote a code, so you can delete the old one and write the new one. So this is how it's going to start. So we got our constructors, we got 2 arrays inside empty. Now we're going to write methods for this class. So first method is going to be user present. So we want to check if a user is present. It's going to take a username and parameters, and then so just for debugging reasons, I find this kind of helpful to if something doesn't work well. we can call console.log, and we say user present called. So we know that this method has been called. This only shows in the console anyway, so it doesn't affect your program. All right, so to check if a user is present, we want to first of all check if we have any users into our users array. So if this dot users dot length is greater than 0, that means we have some. So we're going to for loop for variable I that equals to 0 while I is smaller than this dot users dot length, and then we increment. Alright, and so simply if we do find this dot users dot I is equal to our username, if that's right, we just return true. And if all these don't do anything, we just return false. Alright, so if we find the user, we return true. If we do not find it, return false. And that's it. So we just check if the user is already present. Alright, now obviously if we check the user, we want to check the ID as well. So we're going to do ID present. It's going to take the ID as a parameter, and then I'm just going to do the exact same thing as I did last function. So I'm just going to copy paste this actually. So grab the console.log and then ID present called. Alright, so same thing here. We want to check if we do have any IDs in first. So we want to check if this dot data dot length is greater than 0. If it is, then we're going to for loop on it. So variable I equals 0, I smaller than this dot data dot length, and we'll increment our I after every loop. It's literally going to be pretty identical to user present, so we're just going to check if this dot data dot I dot ID is equal to the ID we got. And if we find it, we return true. If we do not find it, we return false. Alright. Just check, see if ID is present. Alright, so now we check user, we check ID. Now we have to be able to add user and add an ID. So if we want to add a user, we're going to need its ID and its username. And then we can console.log add user called. So we're going to for loop on all of our IDs we got in our data. So and so every rotation in our loop, we want to check if the data, if the ID from the inside the data array is equal to the ID the user wrote. So if the ID wrote a user that if the user wrote an ID that's already present, we don't want to create a new ID. We just want to push its username inside the array so that we only save the username with the new ID. So for this, we're going to check if this dot data ID is equal to ID. If so, we're going to this dot data dot users push its username, and then obviously we want to push also into our arrays into our user array. So we know that the user already wrote an ID inside, so we can delete its previous ID if we need to at some point. So here we check if the ID is already present, then we push its username, and we push its username into our users array as well, and then we can return nothing. It's just it just stops the function from running because we did what we needed to do. All right, so this is when you add a user that already has the ID that he wrote is already inside the listings. So what if the ID is not inside the listings and you need to create a new ID and the username, right? So we're gonna just add new ID. Sorry, just add ID at this point. It's also gonna take an ID and a username as parameters. So here, this one's really simple, honestly. I'm just gonna console.log new ID. Oops. New ID called. Alright, and this one we just push our new entry into the data array, and then we push the user into the user array. So this data push, we're gonna push a new entry, which is the object we created earlier. And this object, if we go and check on its file, it takes an ID and a username in the constructor to be able to create it. So here we're going to push the ID and username that we get over here in these parameters. They're gonna be added down here. And then we can add to our users array, we're gonna push in its username. And that's it. That's all we need to do. Alright, so this creates a new ID. So new ID. And then the one we wrote earlier, it's a new user. Okay, so now we check if a user is present, we check if an ID is present, we check if, we don't check it, we add a user and we add an ID. Now we want to be able to delete a user, and then we're going to delete the user entry, and then we're going to sort it. So the next one is pretty simple as well. It's similar to the previous functions we wrote. But when we delete user entry, that's going to be a lot more complex, and the sorting is not really complex if you understand sorting. So let's start with delete user. Alright, so to delete a user, we're going to need its username. And after that, we're just going to console.log delete user called. I'm really bad at typing today. Alright, so we're just going to console.log so we know that we use the method, and then we're going to for loop on all of our users inside the user array that we declared up here, and then we're going to check if this username we got here is equal to any of the usernames inside this array. If it's equal, I'll show you how we remove it. So for variable I equals to 0 while I is smaller than this dot data, this dot users dot length. Now we want to check. So if the data, this dot users dot I is equal to our username, then so we found the player. It's already he's a user, so we know we have to delete him now. So we're going to create a temporary value. We're just going to call it let temp is equal to this dot users dot I. All right, so we copy the value that technically the same thing as the username, but we copy his memory slot into our temporary slot. And with this, we can now go and this dot users dash I is equal to this dot users of 0. So we take the first value in the array and we put it into our I value, so whichever index we currently have. And then we're going to take the users dot 0 which is the first line in the array, and we're going to give it the temp value. So what we did right here is like kind of a switch. So this one is usually equal to obviously its own username, and then username 0 has one as well, but we switched them around so that I can remove the first one in the array, and this one is still saved correctly in a different position, which doesn't matter in the order. So to remove the first object into an array, you have to shift it out. So this.users.shift, and then just like that. So now the user we want to delete is put in the first index of our array, and then we shift, so it's gone. And after we've done that, we can return, because we don't need to do anything else. So this find and delete username from users array. Alright, now a little more complex. We're gonna delete a user entry. So delete user entry. User entry technically is the username and the ID on a so if I open, let's say how you see this here, 222111, they both have one player. This is technically an entry, right? So let's say, so I'm gonna start it. Alright, so let's say I put, is this all showing onto my, I gotta make sure this shows onto me. Okay, yeah, it shows. Alright, so let's say I put AAA as an entry, alright? So it saves it, but next, oh, I did a typo, and I want to change my ID to FE3, let's say. You see how it removes the one I previously had and it switches to a new one? To be able to do this, we're gonna have to evaluate if our entry is only containing one user or more, because that will have a different way to delete. If it has only one user, we delete the whole thing. If it has multiple users, we find our users and we do the same thing we did here, and we change it to the first position of the array, and then we delete it. So let's get it started. So delete username, that's what we need, and then we're just gonna console log like we did on the other ones, just that say that we called this method. So delete user entry called. Alright, so here we're going to start with our first condition. So we only want to execute this method if we do have any information into our data array and our users array. So if this.data.length is greater than 0 and this.users.length is greater than 0. So if we do have information in both of these, we can continue. If we don't, then don't do anything. We don't want to do anything if we don't have any data in our arrays. Alright. So first condition is if we only have one username into one ID, we can remove the ID completely. We don't have to go remove the username. We just need to remove the whole thing. So in this case, so if this.data.length is equal to 1 and this.data.0.users.length is equal to 1. In this case, so if we only have one ID into our data array and that we only have one user inside that ID, then we check. So if this.data.0.of0, which is always the first one in the array, is equal to our username. And if so, we open this up and we remove. So we're going to this.data.pop. Pop removes the last object into an array. Since we only got one, I can just pop this out, so we don't have to worry about moving anything around. And then we also have to delete our user, right? So this.users.pop, and then this is done. So we delete the entry when only one ID and username is found. Alright, so if we do this, we just restart from 0 technically. It's like if we have nothing in our array. Else, that means we do have information into our array. This is where we check if we have one username or only or we have more username into the same array. So we're going to start off by doing a for loop for variable I equals 0 smaller than this.data.length. And we increment our value and then we check. So if this.data dot I dot users dot length is greater than 0, if so, then we go for, so a second for loop. So variable j is equal to 0 while j is smaller than this dot data of I dot users dot length. I'll explain this in a second. I'm just gonna write it down so that. Alright, so first for loop is going to go through our data, so all of our IDs. And then the second for loop is gonna go through our users, because if I open this up again, here you have one ID, so that's in our data array, and you have one username, right? But if we have multiple usernames here, we just want to remove the username that wrote a new code and not remove the whole entry. So this is where we loop on that array of users right here. And then we're going to check if our this.data of I dot users of j, since this is this value here, is equal to our username, and if this.data of I dot users dot length dot length is greater than 1. If so, if here we have more than one username and we found the username that we want to remove in the array, we create another temp value. So we can call this one temp as well, since this value here does not affect this function. It's written inside, so it's not a global value, so we don't have to worry about it. So we can write the same name of it. And then this will be equal to this.data of I dot users of j. Alright? So that's our temp value. So then this.data of I dot users of j will be equal to this.data of I dot users of 0. Same thing we did here, right? We're just switching the values around. Then we're going to put in, obviously, in the this.data dot 0 dot of I dot users of 0 is going to equal to our temp value, and then we're going to delete it, right? So we're just going to pop the value out. So if you want to console log the value that you remove, we can just create a value and say like deleted user is equal to this dot data of I dot users dot shift. Alright, so we remove the first value because we moved the value we want to delete into the first index. So then we remove the first index, and then we're going to save the value of the deleted in here. And then we're going to console.log user deleted, and then we're going to add its username. So deleted user. So you can write this like this, like how I put the delete user and then I plus, kind of like in Java, and then the user I see a lot of people prefer to do in this manner where they put they use these kind of, I don't know what it's called, and then they just put, like, you can write directly in it, deleted user, and then what I delete, I just go into the object and I grab it, so like this. Doesn't matter which way you write it. This way, like, it looks kind of cleaner, I find, so I'm gonna do it this way. And then we also have to delete the user from our users array. So so the function we just wrote right here, we're going to use it. So this dot delete user, and we're gonna use our username. All right. So here we delete if everything's empty, and here we delete just the username if it has multiple multiple usernames in it. So now we can return. Now we have to delete if we only have one user inside the one ID, but we have multiple different IDs, so we can't just delete it like we did earlier. So if here, we're gonna else on it, and then in this else we're going to write, well, 1 second, just to if else if I mean, and then if this dot data I dot users is equal to 1, and this data dot I, this data dot I dot length, 1 sec, no, I got mixed up. If this dot data dot users of 0 is equal to my username. Alright, so I'm gonna double check, make sure this makes sense. We check our ID 0 of data. We grab the user, so how many people are in it, and we only have 1. Alright, that's perfect. And then if the object we have is equal to our username, that means that's the one we want to delete. And that means we can continue. So I just want to, why is this might have one curly bracket too much. I'm not getting any errors, so I'm going to say that that's the issue. I'll check after. So, alright. So here we're going to create another temp value. I'm going to put temp2 just to make sure. Shouldn't have an issue, but just to guarantee. So this is going to be equal to our data value of I, and then our this dot data of I is going to be equal to this dot data of 0. So we switch them, obviously, like we did everywhere else here. We take the very first value we put into our indexed value, and then in our very first value we put the temp value, which is our indexed value. And then with this we can now, we're gonna put a, so this is gonna be deleted ID, and we're gonna make it equal to this dot data dot shift. So we delete the very first object into the array. Then we're gonna console.log this, and we're gonna put deleted ID, and then we put our value of our deleted ID inside. And then we obviously have to remove our user, so this dot delete user, which is our username. And then we can return. So let me check to make sure this is good. So this else breaks this part of code. This part, our for loops there. If is there, for loop there, else I mean. This is here. Alright, yeah, so we're good. So this deletes users and IDs. Right, I just want to check where this finishes, right here. Now that we're done with this, the last thing we need is just a sorting function. So to sort, it's going to take like, so let's say we write multiple entries. We want to put the one with the most users in it first. So to be able to do that, we just have to sort them by how many usernames we have inside the arrays. So I create a sort function, and in this function, we're going to check if this .data.length is greater than 2, or greater or equal. Because if we only have one, there's no reason to sort, right? You only got one ID. But if we do have 2, then we can start sorting. So we need 2 for loops here because it's a basic sorting function. I didn't want to make anything too complicated because it doesn't really matter for this use right now. If later on I can make a more optimized version of this with different data structures, like using a trie instead of using arrays. And then so I'm just creating 2 for loops right now, and I'm making them so this one's going to equal to I, while j is smaller than this .data.length, and j plus plus. All right, so first for loops, I start from 0, while I is smaller than this .data.length minus 1. The reason why I'm doing minus 1 here is because j is equal to I plus 1. Alright, so by this one's gonna go to the before last value of the arrays, and this one's gonna go to the last value of the array. So the array is fully covered anyways. We don't have to, if we check this one without the minus 1, we end up checking the same value, which is, we don't want to do that. We want to check different values, right? So that's how we're gonna start off with this, and then we check. So if this data dot I is smaller than this data I users length. So if our user length is smaller than this data j users length, if it's smaller, that means we want to do the same switch we've been doing this whole time. All right, so we take a temp value and we make it equal to our this data I, this data this data of I is equal to this data of j, and then this data of j is equal to 10. And then, well, no, we don't return actually, because we're going to be executing this for multiple values sometimes. Alright, so I'm going to check how long this recording is. Oh god, yeah. Alright, so this, now that we finished this filing, we're just going to write a comment quick. So sorts the server ID. I don't know, how would I write this? Entry with most players. So I'm gonna write a comment for this real quick. So so this sorts the entry with most users. Alright. So if we check here, so we created our function listing, and I'm gonna save it actually. So we got our listing class and our entry class. Alright. With this, we're able to now create our command, which will do the last 3 function of saving codes. I'm gonna do that in the next episode because this one's already really long. So make sure, if you want to check out the next series, you gotta subscribe and get notifications. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment in the comment section. And have a great day. Thank you.